Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are doing well, and welcome to the first weekend of the new year. This is, of course, 2025, and it has been a very eventful new year so far. We're going to be addressing the topic of finding Hebrews. There are some very bold claims that are re-emerging related to Hebrew Israelite identity and the land of the people known as the Hebrew and Israelites. Now, a number of these claims are coming not only from those identifying as Hebrew Israelites, but other groups, other ethnic collectives have made some assertions, and then there are some historical assertions and some historical records that suggest that the Hebrews were found in the Americas and that the American Indians are the Hebrews. Now, this is a very interesting claim because there was already a Hebrew claim to Asia. There was a Hebrew claim asserted related to Africa. There has been a Hebrew claim asserted related to Europe. And so America would be like the final frontier. And so with each of these, there is this assertion that each place is land that was promised to Abraham. And so what we're going to do is we are going to now put forth a call for individuals to present their best evidence of this Hebrew identity in the Americas. And we're going to look at exactly what that evidence should look like. Now, thankfully, we are in a position to request the evidence and for the evidence to be provided for this land claim from entities understanding themselves as the Hebrew Israelites. Now, what's interesting about the claims is that initially the claim or the assertion was that the Hebrew Israelites eventually worked their way into Africa. And then there was another narrative about the Hebrew Israelites working their way into Europe and ruling on all of the thrones, primarily in Europe. Now, of course, this is an interesting assertion because it just happens to be that the thrones of Europe are the thrones that overthrew the thrones in the Americas. But this assertion essentially goes that the 10 missing tribes or dispersed tribes, they are not really lost in the way that people tend to think about lost, and we've talked about that before. They are actually understood in terms of the scripture as destroyed tribes. But however, somehow or another, these 10 tribes, there were 12, 13, depending on how you're counting, okay? They made their way into Europe and they made their way to the top of the food chain there. But then the new narrative that is coming around is that the 10 tribes made their way to the Americas, only to be met by the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi when they ventured over from Africa subsequent to the transatlantic slave trade. And so this is a very interesting narrative all the way around because, of course, another part of the narrative is that it is Christopher Columbus who discovered all of this. Okay, and so when Christopher Columbus stumbled upon what he thought were the Hebrews in the Caribbean, he purportedly identified them as such. Okay, and so there are a number of assertions floating around here, and a number of narratives that are actually conflicting with each other. And so now, however, with all of the resources that we have the ability now to ask for evidence. Yes, individual evidence from individuals who are identifying as Hebrew Israelite, to demonstrate that they came from Europe, as part of these 10 ruling tribes, kingdoms, and also that they've been here the entire time, these 10 tribes. And so there is ample opportunity now to put forth that individual ancestral evidence. And quite frankly, it is requested. And so this evidence should show affiliation with a particular indigenous family, tribe, clan, and very specifically, it needs to be patrilineal, not necessarily patriarchal, but we need to see patrilineal and patrifocal. Okay, so those are some things to consider as we venture through this conversation. Now, as we are considering these interesting claims, these multi-directional claims, I want to point out a few facts, not just history, but modern history. First of all, when individuals were found and they were thought to be Hebrews, there were a few reasons for these findings or these beliefs. Some of them had to do with appearance, some of them had to do with customs. But there's something else that stands out that brings up the question about which Hebrews. Okay, so we have this narrative about finding the Hebrews in the Americas, but notably, the Hebrews that were purportedly found in the Americas were of a brown hue. And not only were they of a brown hue, they were referred to specifically as copper colored and, wait for it, the red man. Okay. The red man is definitely not Jacob. Okay. In fact, the red man is specifically the name that is associated with Esau. And so it would be the Hebrew Esau people versus the Hebrew Israelites. And so I'm bringing that up, but of course, individuals, should consider finding the evidence to support this idea that the Hebrews found were not the red man, and that the Hebrews found were Jacob versus Esau, or Jacob versus anyone. Okay, but right now, all we really have is the red man, and individuals need to keep that at the forefront as they are making these assertions about the land being promised to Abraham and, of course, subsequently to Isaac and Jacob. There are what are known as confounding variables in this narrative. And so that is something that needs to be taken into consideration as we consider the other things that we're going to address. Now, based upon the direction that individuals are asserting they emerged from, they would have ended up in a particular area of the Americas. And when we say the Americas, we're talking about North America, South America, Central America, all of the islands. Okay. So they would be coming from a particular direction, and they would be encountering very specific people. And so they would be encountering family groups, clans, tribes in the Caribbean. Notably, they would have been encountering the woodlands. And so the American Indians in the northeast woodlands and the southeast woodlands. This is noteworthy for a particular reason related to this lineage dynamic. By and large, the major American Indian groups, the large ones, many of these southeast and northeast woodland tribes and clans, they are matrilineal. Okay? And so this is another one of those confounding variables. And we are dealing with actual history and actual people now. And so those individuals who are identifying as Hebrew Israelite would need to provide evidence that fits with the actual narratives and the actual lives of the actual American Indians that are here and that have been here. Now remember, when we are talking about matrilineal, we are not necessarily talking about a matriarchy, but we are talking about the line of inheritance. And so with respect to many of the American Indian groups, particularly the woodland Indians, we are talking about a significant amount of matrilineal descent. If there had been no matrilineal descent, there probably would not have been a conquering of all of these American Indian groups. And so we know we are dealing with a matrilineal dynamic that has, quite frankly, had serious historic repercussions. Okay, so when individuals are asserting this Hebrew Israelite Abrahamic promised land narrative, they are changing the reality of many American Indian collectives and the American Indian collectives that they would be asserting membership for. Okay, so that would be those woodland Indians. The problem is that the Abrahamic narrative is a patrilineal narrative. Quite frankly, women are almost non-existent in terms of names in much of the scripture. Okay. The Abrahamic narrative is also patrifocal. The focus is on the father line. So you've got this inheritance through the father line. You've got a focus on the father line, which is interesting because part of the narrative in scripture is that a man is to leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. And so there's the assertion that the man is not with his family. The assertion is that the man has left his mother and father and has ventured off with the mother, okay, the wife, okay. So that's just another one of those interesting confounds, okay. We also have a dynamic of patriarchy, and a patriarchy that pretty much erases the inheritance through the maternal line completely. There is a patriarchy that serves to shift everything. So not just the inheritance, but the focus. Okay. And so it becomes the father line that matters the most. The focus is on the male line again. And then the patriarchy means that that's also the rule. Okay, so with respect to the Hebrew Israelite narrative, we have patrilineal, patrifocal, and patriarchal. This is in direct contravention to what the reality happens to be in the woodlands. And so that needs to be reconciled. And so, with respect to these assertions about the Americas being the promised land for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there is opportunity now to prove this connection and prove this American Indian identity without a problem, quite frankly. Now, I'm just going to quickly go over some of the matrilineal tribes and clans so that individuals can exclude them from their search and their analysis in terms of ancestry, if they are Hebrew, Israelite, claiming American Indian identity and claiming that the Americas belong to the Hebrew Israelites, specifically Jacob. That's what we're talking about here. And so when you look at many of the more Eastern collectives, you have the large collectives such as the Cherokee being matrilineal, Chickasaw matrilineal, Choctaw matrilineal. And again, part of the reason for matrilineal descent is, as you can imagine, what's known as mother's baby and father's maybe. And so when you have matrilineal descent, you know pretty much for sure who the children are and where the children belong. When you have patrilineal descent, however, it changes things. It makes things a little bit more complex. But for the most part, you have these large collectives in the woodlands identifying as and having an ancestral line that is counter to the ancestral line that is described in Scripture. And so it makes it very difficult to reconcile that for those individuals who are now claiming that these are their people, if these are their people and they are not their people based upon matrilineal descent, because there are no 12 tribes of Indians. There are no 12 female daughters of anyone that we know of right now. But we have this matrilineal makeup going on that, again, is in conflict with the narrative of the 12 or 13 tribes of Israel and then the 10 coming here to the Americas. Now, it would be really great if individuals had some actual names of some tribes that go along with this narrative. There has been the assertion of Gad, and but we don't really see a patrilineal tribe, American Indian tribe, going by the name of Gad. If you have found one, however, please present that information so that we can consider that. Okay, so we've got the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. Let's look at some other collectives. So we also have the interesting Iroquois. We have the Hopi, the Lenape, we have the Mohican, and the Seminole. And all of these have matrilineal ties. Now, what's interesting about the Seminole, and of course some of the other groups, the Iroquois too, many of them do have some male lines that relate back to Europe and Africa, very specifically sort of the west coast of Africa, west central Africa, and of course Western Europe. Now this ties into very interestingly and expectedly, ties into the migration from both Europe and Africa into the Americas and the relationships that were formed between those collectives and the indigenous American women. Now, it's not always clear how these relationships were formed, but if it's anything like what took place on the west coast of Africa, there was a bit of deception and trickery going on, so that what might have been matrilineal turned into something that was patrilineal. However, these have been preserved in spite of all of that. And as a matter of fact, when you have that diversity in terms of male lines and you see all of these different Y haplogroups, it suggests that you have diversity in terms of the males. And so you don't have this one male that's going down the line and the tribe being centered on that particular male. What we have is the alternative to that, which of course is the female line. And so that's what we have with these groups. We have the Iroquois, the Hopi, Lenape, Mohican, and the Seminoles. Adding to that and including individuals a little bit further west, we have the Western Apache being matrilineal, the Pima being matrilocal, and then the Muskogee in general being matrilineal. And again, this is important because of the contacts that were made. And when these contacts were made, they were being made primarily with matrilineal collectives. And so it's hard to know how people were interpreting that when they were writing back to Europe, but that's what they were encountering frequently on the East Coast. And here you can also see the Navajo and some of the Powhatan Confederacy, the Wampanoag. You can see that these collectives, which are some major first contact groups, they are historically matrilineal. And here you can see the Nipmuc, the Pueblo, and the Zuni also being matrilineal. So we're talking a little bit further west, but again, matrilineal collective. And there are many matrilineal collectives, by the way, but there are also patrilineal collectives. And so what we should expect to see when individuals start putting forth their evidence is we should start seeing these connections between individuals who are identifying as Hebrew Israelite and very specific patrilineal collectives in the United States and in the Caribbean. Oh, by the way, the Taino are also historically matrilineal. Now, as we wrap this up, we're just going to address a couple of lingering concerns. One has to do with representation, and we discussed this before with respect to ADOS. When individuals are allowing other people to represent them on these ancestry journeys, individuals need to make sure that the people who are representing them are actually representing them, that they are actually them. Because a number of individuals have taken the charge to be the voice of individuals who are descended from enslaved individuals, are individuals who have been descended from American Indians. They are American Indians. In many instances, individuals are being led by, represented by individuals who have not necessarily shown themselves worthy of the role of representative. What do I mean by that? Think about a class action. In a class action, you have to have someone at the head of the class, okay, who is similar to all of the other people in the class. And so that class representative needs to actually be the thing that people think they are identifying with, their cause. It needs to be the same cause. But what has happened in many instances is individuals will have the voice, but they may not be the actual entity. The reason they may not be is because in many instances people don't even know. People aren't even asking for that proof. It's fine if individuals don't want to share their ancestry information in general, but once individuals start asserting themselves as sort of the leader of the pack, they are the voice for all of the American Indians. They are the voice for all of ADOS. They need to put forth the evidence. They need to show that they are descended from individuals who were enslaved in the Americas in the chattel slavery system. They need to show that. It needs to be understood whether they are also descended from individuals who were deported out of Europe or deported out of Africa. Those things also need to be made clear. You need to know who they are. And first of all, they need to know who they are before they start to take on those roles. And they need to be open about that. Because it's very difficult for someone to have some of these pure ancestries that some people are asserting. It's very difficult, given the history, to be a pure African, a pure American Indian, a pure European, whatever that's all supposed to look like. And so with respect to these people who are serving as the voices, you need to have a clear understanding of who these people are and the extent to which they actually are able to represent you. So now here we have a collective of individuals asserting themselves to be Hebrew Israelites. Those individuals, just like anyone else, they need to put forth the evidence to show that they are American Indian. Okay? It's one thing to assert a belief based upon scripture that one is a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's another thing to assert that one has been gifted the entirety of the Americas by God through Abraham and Isaac. Okay, that's a different kind of assertion we've got going on here. But also with that is the assertion that the American Indians are descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so there's an interesting conflation going on here with these various identities. And then there's also, with this dynamic, you have a situation wherein an ethnic religious collective is putting an identity onto another group of people. And they need to come with the evidence for that, because the people are actually here, okay? And so these who are asserting a different identity for the people, they need to put forth the hard evidence demonstrating that the people are not who they think they are, but they are who the Hebrew Israelites say they are. This, of course, is going to be a tough act, and it should be. But this is one of those dynamics where you get to see in real time the superimposition of identity and the appropriation of identity. And that's what it's going to be called until these growing individuals, there's a growing number here, until they put forth the evidence to prove not that big collective identity, but their own individual identity that ties them to the land. In other words, who is their grandmother and who is their grandfather? And in what tribe, clan, or family Does the grandmother belong and the grandfather belong? The American Indians are here, and so there is ample opportunity for individuals to identify these ties. And so if individuals are identifying as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and American Indian, they should have no problem putting forth evidence of this identity and this claim. Now, with that, we will close. And again, welcome to 2025. And I probably speak for many people when I say we are looking forward to this ancestral evidence that's going to be presented by the individuals who are identifying as Hebrew Israelite. Of course, many of them have their own channels, and so there is a definite means for providing this information, this evidence, and hopefully this is going to be a growth-inspiring dynamic for all concerned.